Welcome to part 2 of my multi-episode analysis of why the Rings of Power sucks. If you haven't seen part 1 and would like to watch that first, the link to that video will be in the description. But without wasting any more time, let's get right back into the hellstorm, which is Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power. In today's part, we are going to be taking an in-depth look at the plot and why it debatably could be the worst part of the show. I'll take a look at the main plot as well as the 3 subplots. So when we take a look at the plot as a whole, it's very clear that this storyline is nowhere near the quality of the films. This show is so mind-numbingly slow-paced, and most of the stuff that happens is either drawn out for way too long or just not needed entirely. This show has a runtime of roughly 9 hours, but after watching the whole thing, I think they could have easily cut this thing down to a 3-hour movie. There is such little amounts of stuff that happens throughout that 9 hours that I almost fell asleep multiple times while watching it. So the main storyline of Rings of Power follows Galadriel trying to hunt down Sauron after she killed her brother. After the prologue is over, we pick up with Galadriel, who has been leading her company in search of Sauron for hundreds of years. Hundreds of years? Jesus, you'd think that maybe after hundreds of years and undoubtedly multiple times sweeping the entirety of Middle-earth, that you'd probably come to the conclusion that this guy is either dead or just unfindable. They eventually quit when Galadriel's company finally stands up and just says how dumb this all is. When they all return home, the king holds a ceremony for them, and yes, you failed, but at least you tried. So the king grants them all the right to go to Valinor, where they can all retire. All seems to be going well, and then Galadriel just jumps from the ship. Oh my god. And then she swims all the way back to Middle-earth. Yes, I realize that she was picked up somewhere in the middle, but you do realize that she just swam across an entire ocean. When you stop and start to think about some of these small details, you really start to realize just how stupidly the show is written. But anyways, Galadriel and Halbrand are then attacked by a sea monster because they need a plot to happen, where they are then picked up by Elendil. And what follows is pretty much jack shit for the next 2 to 3 episodes. So they go to Numenor, and this is what baffles me. Galadriel is very clear that she does not want to be there, and she wants to leave. Queen Muriel also does not want Galadriel to be there. Great. So Galadriel should just leave because nobody wants her there, right? Nope. Queen Muriel decides that she'll discuss the issue with her council for the next couple of days. What the fuck? If nobody wants her there, and she doesn't want to be there, then why don't you just kick her out? Oh, I know, because you need to fill the next 2 episodes with content at the expense of the story making sense. For the next 2 to 3 episodes, all that happens in this main storyline is Galadriel and Halbrand just going about the island, bitching, getting into fights, and getting thrown in jail. It's just worthless and doesn't serve any purpose. Oh, and then there's all this stuff with Isildur and his sidekicks, but literally none of it matters because it has no actual weight on the overarching story. It's just there to serve as filler and as fan service because it's Isildur. Is there any reason for him to actually be in the show, though? No, there is not. So then, Galadriel, Halbrand, and the Númenóreans travel to Middle-earth to help the Southlanders fight off an orc invasion. This is where the main storyline and Subplot 1 combine for a little bit, so I'll discuss the battle sequence more in depth when I talk about Subplot 1. So after the battle is concluded, Halbrand is announced as the King of the Southlands. But then he gets injured, so him and Galadriel travel to get him healed by the elves. When Halbrand gets healed, he starts helping Celebrimbor crafting metals, and this is when Galadriel starts to get a little suspicious of him because he seems to know more than he should. Really? This is the first time you're getting suspicious of him? Not when he just randomly picked you up in the middle of an entire ocean, or when he just by chance happens to be the long-lost king of a kingdom that hasn't had a king for over 1,000 years. This is the first time you get suspicious? When he starts dropping basic knowledge to Celebrimbor about strengthening the effects of metals by combining them, stuff Celebrimbor should obviously know? God, this show is stupidly written. But anyways, Galadriel goes through some old chronicles or something and discovers that the last king of the Southlands died 1,000 years ago without an heir, which makes Halbrand a liar. And Halbrand is just like, well, shit, you caught me. Surprise! I'm Sauron. This reveal might have actually made me feel something if I gave a shit about these 2 characters, but I don't. So when it was revealed, I literally didn't feel a thing. And that's the end of the main plot. If I'm being honest, they really could have cut 70% of this main plot off. That way, it wouldn't have felt like such a constant drag, and it could have been somewhat decent. But these writers are obviously way out of their creative depth for taking on a show this massive, and as a result, 70% of the main plot of your story is completely worthless. Subplot 1. I'm simply going to call this the Arondir subplot because that's pretty much what it is, the Arondir subplot. So basically, Arondir and these other elves are stationed in this watchtower to watch over a city of humans. The reason that they're doing this is because the Southlanders sided with Morgoth in a war 300 years ago, so basically they're keeping an eye on them to make sure they don't disbehave again. Wait, hold on. They've been here for 300 years? Jesus, don't you think that's a little bit of overkill? If you look at actual events from history, when the Union won the war against the Confederates in the American Civil War, they occupied the South for 12 years before they left. And yeah, they probably should have stayed there for more like 25 years, because what happened in the South after was pretty awful. But as it relates to this show, don't you think that them staying for 25 to 30 years would have been enough to de-escalate the tensions and change the culture? But no, these guys have been here for 300 years. That's like 12 human generations. It makes no sense that the elves would stay there that long unless they were trying to be tyrannical. Whoever came up with that plot point did not think about the logic on that one. But anyways, Arondir secretly or non-secretly has a love affair with a local woman. This love story really goes nowhere and doesn't have much weight to the overarching story. It wasn't really necessary, but I feel like the writers felt like they had to have a love story in here because almost every story does, so they just shoehorned it in. So this subplot really gets going when orcs start showing up, even though they were thought to have all been dead. They've built these intricate underground tunnels, and when Arondir discovers them and decides to follow them, he is captured. He's taken as a slave for a little bit and eventually escapes. But before he escapes, he meets this evil elf guy named Udar, who is the leader of these orcs, I guess, and just a Sauron bait and switch. When Arondir returns to the village, they realize that they're all fucked, so they decide to take refuge in a nearby elf tower. Okay, that's a smart plan. So the orcs attack, and oh, where did they all go? What?! How did they get down there without being seen? You are literally standing exactly where the orcs were walking to get to your castle. And you had to have walked by them because there is only one way of entry into this castle. So this stupid writing pays off, of course, or else they wouldn't have written it. When the orcs attack the second night, they're all about to die, but of course the Númenóreans show up at exactly the right time to save them. Why does this happen? Because the plot needs it to. So they win the battle and everybody is happy, and this is when the magical bullshit starts to come into play. So basically, there's been this broken sword MacGuffin that's just been lying around the whole season, and we haven't really known what its purpose was going to be for, but oh buddy, did we find out. So when everybody was in the elf castle, they discovered this evil rock with a slit in it, and Arondir's like, nah bro, don't touch that. So this dude from this village, who is loyal to Udar, finds the magical bullshit key and then takes it to the evil rock. When he puts the key in the slit of the rock, it starts a goofy-ass chain reaction, which results in a dormant volcano erupting, completely terraforming the region to become what is now known as Mordor. I would argue that this is the stupidest plot point in the entire show. You would think that something as epically evil as Mordor would have been created through centuries of war, absolutely decimating the land, but no. Mordor was created because this guy put a key in a rock. Just let that sink in for a second. And that's pretty much the end of this subplot. They all eventually meet up after the eruption and make camp, and then we never see them again. Subplot 2, the Elrond and Dwarf subplot. Out of all the subplots, this was definitely the best. That doesn't mean it doesn't have its issues though. So Celebrimbor needs manual labor to help build something. I can't remember what it is, it's not important. But he doesn't have enough elves necessary to complete the tasks, so he seeks out the help of Elrond. Elrond suggests that perhaps maybe they should look outside their own race to find some manpower, and so it is. So Elrond travels to Khazad-dûm to seek help from his friend Prince Durin. Prince Durin, however, doesn't really want to see Elrond, so they have a rock slamming contest to determine whether he can stay or not. I honestly thought that this scene was completely unnecessary and just could have been cut entirely. And what follows is actually a pretty great scene where Durin just explodes on Elrond because he hasn't come to see him in 20 years. It definitely puts in perspective just how meaningless 1 or 2 years is in the life of an elf because they live for thousands and thousands of years. Durin is obviously visibly upset because 20 years to him is a big deal because he is mortal, but they eventually make up. This is actually a very good scene and probably one of the best in the show. For the rest of this subplot, it's very sporadic of how much time it gets per episode. Out of the 3 subplots, this definitely gets the least amount of screen time. But pretty much what happens for the next number of episodes is the dwarves start mining deeper into the mountains, and they discover the ore Mithril, which was actually pretty cool to see. But then the elves start dying for some reason, and they discover that the only way that they can survive is by having access to the Mithril. I personally thought that this was pretty dumb. Like, why are you making the Mithril magic all of a sudden? Like, why can't it just be a very rare element that's pretty much impossible to cut through? Why do you have to make it magic? So then Elrond pleads his case to King Durin, asking if he could please spare some Mithril so that his people don't die. And King Durin says, fuck you kid, I ain't helping you cheat death. Which makes Prince Durin upset, obviously, because he doesn't want to see his friend die. In the end, Elrond only receives one small rock of mithril from Prince Durin as a gift, and that is pretty much the end of that subplot. Subplot 3, the Harfoot subplot. I really don't have much to say about the Harfoot subplot other than the fact that it's shit, because it doesn't tie into the main plot or the other two subplots at all. It stands completely on its own and really has no reason for being in the show other than to just fill up time. So the Harfoots are these stupid little off-brand hobbits that are one with nature, I guess. They live super simplistic lifestyles, they migrate a lot, and they're constantly trying not to die. A lot changes, however, when Nori, one of the Harfoots, discovers a wizard who fell from the sky. For the next 6 or 7 episodes, Nori follows this wizard around as he discovers who he is, I guess. Now my question to you is this: why were the Harfoots even needed in this subplot? This storyline would have been much better if it was just dedicated to Gandalf falling from the sky and gradually discovering who he is and what his powers are by going on adventures through Middle-earth. But nope. Instead, they just felt like they had to include the musty-ass plant hobbits. Why? Don't know. In the end, Nori decides to leave the Harfoot lifestyle behind and follow Gandalf full-time to wherever. We don't exactly know where. Oh, and also there's this super cornball fight with these magic people towards the end, but the less said about it, the better. In the end, it's safe to say that this show is written terribly. It is just riddled with filler, uninteresting plot points, and things that just don't make sense. You can't have a good show if your main storyline is terrible, 2 out of your 3 subplots are terrible, with only one being somewhat decent. If the showrunners ever want to win back at least some respect from the fans of the Middle-earth stories, they need to bring in some people for Season 2 that understand the Tolkien lore, know how to write a good story, and overall just know what they're doing. Even then, it might not be enough to repair the damage that they've already done. If you think that the characters and the plot were the only things that were bad about the Rings of Power though, stay tuned for part 3 where I'll go over how this show disrespects Tolkien and his legacy. If you like this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you'll be notified when I post part 3. But anyways, that's all I got for today, guys. I'll see you next time.